Welcome to this video on Notice 2024-02, known as the Grab Bag Notice. Join us as Mike Finch, Director of Government Affairs and Document Drafting, discusses a provision included in this important notice.
Roth employer contributions. This is an item that, as many of you know, has generated a lot of interest, which is sort of intriguing to me considering two things. First of all, plan permitting. Again, as many of you know, participants can already convert the pre-tax portion of their account balances to Roth by requesting an in-plan Roth rollover. So why don't we just let employers put their money in the plan and then have people do in-plan Roth conversion? The government is trying to do here is raise revenue, or at least on paper, show that they are raising revenue so that this bill scores neutrally, right? It's not going to cost taxpayers money. And that really is necessary these days in order to get bipartisan support for a bill. If a bill is not revenue neutral, oftentimes it's not going to move forward. So in order to get there, they have to come up with ways to raise revenue. And one of the ways is to encourage people to pay taxes now. That is their form of revenue. And if we can convince people to contribute in a Roth format, that's accomplishing their objective. I would argue that their objective was on paper only for the most part. Again, when they go through the bill making process, they get it scored by an entity called the Joint Committee on Taxation. If the Joint Committee on Taxation says this bill is revenue neutral, everybody's happy. Do they really think that a lot of people are going to use a new feature like this when there's already a feature that allows them to do this? Or is this just sort of a budget gimmick that they are using? And I think the answer to that ultimately remains to be seen. And again, we've seen a lot of interest in this. I don't necessarily get it. I think the bigger Roth development from Secure 2.0 certainly is the exclusion of Roth balances for RMD purposes. If I can convert everything I have to Roth and never have to take an RMD from a wealth management perspective or from a wealth accumulation perspective, that's significant. And I think the grab bag, however, in regards to this specific provision, whether it proved to be popular or not, it did provide some much needed answers regarding this feature. To start with, the IRS clarified that this feature is optional for employers, which is how we've understood it from day one. But they did clarify also that that includes any combination of deferrals, match, or non-elective. It's not an all or nothing thing. So as we're developing our amendments in our documents, we're going to have to, for example, take into consideration that employers may want to be source specific in terms of what can be contributed as Roth or not contributed as Roth. I'm not sure employers are going to care too awfully much what the tax nature of employees' balances are, but for one reason or another, some of them might. The notice also clarifies that Roth employer contribution elections must be irrevocable elections. They have to be made before the contributions are made, and once those contributions are made, you can't kind of go back on anything, if you will. It's a done deal at that point. And participants have to be permitted to make or change their election at least once a year with respect to future contributions. Also, the notice clarified that employer contributions are included in income for tax purposes, but they are not subject to income tax withholding or FICA or FUTA taxes because they're not wages. These are employer contributions, regardless of the tax nature of them, with the exception of governmental 457 plans. They are treated differently from a wage perspective. But generally speaking, for the plans that we are most often dealing with, again, this money is going to be taxable if there is an election to contribute as Roth. There won't be any tax withholding throughout the year like there is for wage withholding, nothing FICA or FUTA related. The contributions may only be made by participants who are 100% vested in the particular source of contribution that they wish to contribute as Roth. And this is a variance from the in-plan Roth conversions, for which employers have a choice over this matter, right? They could say, look, if you're not 100% vested, you can still do an in-plan Roth conversion. You just can't convert non-vested money. You're limited in what you can convert to what you are vested in. This is different. Participants, and I don't know why the government did this. I was hoping they wouldn't. It does make it more simple this way, as we talked through some of the details as we were analyzing this provision in the bill, there are some complications just because this money is not yet in the plan and employers are oftentimes not as familiar with the vested percentages of people as perhaps they should be. and that can make things difficult. So from a simplicity perspective, this makes sense. It does, however, make things different for some plans compared to how they are designed from an in-plan Roth perspective. And I think the main thing I was looking for here ultimately was whether we could just lift our in-plan conversion process and put that over here for this process. And we're not necessarily going to be able to just do that. There's going to have to be some changes systematically to account for a couple of differences for this feature. Another one of those features that is different, we think, is whether or not the 5-year recapture tax applies. That does apply to in-plan conversions will also apply to Roth employer contributions. We don't think that it should, and we are aligned with the rest of the industry in that regard, and we're advocating for that 5-year recapture not to apply, even though, again, it would make a difference between how we have things programmed for in-plan conversions, and that's going to make a little bit more work for us if and when we choose to make this feature available. The contributions, of course, do need to be accounted for separately by source due to their Roth nature and for purposes of determining the appropriate distributable events. Also, the contributions are included in taxable income, as I indicated, and that's in the year that the contribution is made, even if the contribution is being made for a prior year. That was another nice clarification that we wanted to see and that we did get from the IRS. Similar to in-plan Roth rollovers, the contributions are reported in boxes 1 and 2A of the 1099-R form, and they are reported using a code G in box 7 for the year, again, in which the contributions are allocated to the individual's account. The 1099-R was also something that we felt was most appropriate compared to, for example, changing up all of the programming that payroll providers would need to do to report these dollars on a W-2, which never really made sense because, again, these are not wages. They are employer contributions that have never been reported on the W-2 form. And because everybody's already got a 1099-R solution in place, especially with the previous implementation of in-plan Roth conversions, it just made sense to leverage as many of those rules as was possible. So we were glad to see the 1099-R used for this instead of the W-2.
Thank you for joining us on this grab bag notice video, and feel free to watch the other videos about this important topic.